I just wanted to welcome you to the Digital Innovation webinar, which we're going to run for an hour and hopefully share with you some of the latest innovations that we're seeing in digital communications. So the agenda today is going to be firstly just do a brief introduction, myself and Dan Cowley, who will be sharing with you some of the innovations that we've seen. We'll also then be walking through what we see as some of the enablers of digital innovation. What we mean by that is some of the key things that have enabled us to transform how we communicate from a digital perspective. And then Dan will take you through innovations that we've seen in both experience, accessing content, and of course in the enabling technology. Before we get going though, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Richard. I'm CEO of the UK at Black Sun. And have a long background in digital communications technology. And Dan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm head of digital strategy here at Black Sun, so responsible for why we build things, looking at the strategy behind it, the UX, the usability, and excited to be sharing some really innovative ways of thinking today.
Thanks, Dan. So I promise not to spend too long on this, but it's always good for the couple of you on the call I know perhaps not as familiar with us as an agency. We're an international stakeholder communications agency. Basically what we do is we help you define, articulate and communicate your value creation story and really help you connect, engage and reach with your different stakeholders, investors, employees, customers and of course wider society. And through a multitude of channels, so whether that be digital channels, corporate reporting, social media, and of course moving image. Clearly one of the channels is then how we integrate those communications across those different communications vehicles. In terms of digital solutions, obviously we offer a full gamut from commercial websites, corporate websites, and of course internal channels such as employee apps and intranets. And of course, where appropriate, deploying social media and moving image throughout those channels, as you can imagine. And as part of this sequence, of course, what we do also, you'll know through the Complete 100 and Web 100 research, we also provide insights on best practice and run a series of events and webinars this year. So look out for further invitations as we go through the year. But enough about us. What I wanted to do in terms of introducing the webinar is really to talk through what I see as some of the real transformational moments, because it has really driven what we see in terms of the innovations over the last few years. So winding back a few years, what we first of all remember is the introduction of GPS, which extraordinarily is around 1983. You know, clearly what that has driven to in today's world is around geolocation, targeting of services through mobile phones and so on. Then, of course, there was the introduction of the internet, 1990, clearly transformational. I won't go through that too much, but clearly connected world, allowing people to do things real time across the globe. Closely followed then by what we'd say mobile broadband. And my background, actually, I was actually in O2 as a network when mobile broadband was introduced. And it really was a transformational technology, how people would use and see their mobile phone, making sure it was a real companion to them in their day-to-day lives. Following on from that, of course, was then email and SMS. And unbelievably, SMS was actually originally created for emergency services to send point-to-point messages. How that has changed and transformed as people have used it for different purposes. And clearly email has transformed too. So really putting the power of communications point to point in your hand. I guess more recently then there was the introduction of the iPhone, 2007, which again transformed the experience of communications on the move and really was the first fully integrated and seamless tool to enable you to basically have a laptop in your hand wherever you were in the world. And of course after that there has been a real transformation around data and data processing. 175 zettabytes of data predicted by 2025. And 1 zettabyte, to give you an idea, is 1 trillion gigabytes. One of the really key interesting stats for that, which shows how connected a world we will enter, is 90 of those will be from internet devices, internet of things devices, connected devices. And astonishingly, 90% of that data will be created in the last 2 years, which shows the exponential growth of data and how it means we can use that data to transform how we communicate and interact with people online. So I think clearly what those key moments in time over the last decade, and deliberately only focused on the last decade for those, is really driven how we communicate. So I won't go back to 10,000 BC, but clearly you can see we've gone through a whole series of evolutions in how we communicate, from kind of original just recording to broadcasting universally to populations. 80s probably saw the real globalization, and through the mobile phones and internet device globalization and increasing accessibility and touch points. And more recently, real integration through the likes of the iPhone and iPads and so on. And I think where we're heading for now is real exponential growth in what we call experiential communication, so virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on. And we're actually starting to see that in day-to-day communications, and Dan's going to show a very simple example of that later on. And this is really changing the way that we engage and communicate with each other globally. Now, what I would say, interestingly, about current crisis and COVID is that it has actually also started to transform how we communicate and accelerate for change. So I guess on the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about how the fact that we actually, how can I put it, we overestimate the change in the next 2 years, but perhaps underestimate what happens in the next 10. And that's why I think the COVID scenario will be very interesting as we go on to the next slide. Because I think what it will see is a real accelerator of digital innovation. And the reason for that, I think, is that it is already changing how often we use tools, how we process work, and so on. You know, if we look at how we've, I guess, transformed the way we work day to day. So we're really facing a new normal. We're facing a remote workforce that will continue to be remote and probably fragmented across both office and non-office scenarios. Everything has gone digital almost instantaneously, work practices and so on. And obviously that in turn leads to virtual everything, as indeed this webinar and self demonstrates. And I think also what we're seeing is changing societal priorities, much more around social conscious, doing good and so on, which again will change how companies are communicating already. And actually we've seen some early stats for the companies that feel able to around driving investment. So actually, these are stats that have happened since COVID. So 20% of companies are increasing their spend on digital transformation in 2020. 23% of companies have increased the spend in tech and infrastructure to try and match that and keep up with demand. And 49% of corporates are innovating in terms of their messages and communications. And we'll touch a couple of simple examples in a minute. And 60% are finding they're having to innovate in new processes. So I mean, clearly there's going to be tough economic times ahead, no doubt about that. But I think what companies are trying to do is to really drive and enable their digital transformation in order to take advantage of the few opportunities that will be there in the marketplace. And if we look just very briefly at a couple of examples in terms of COVID, clearly we're seeing the adoption of more online processes and tools and techniques. There's a few just shown here on the slide for you today. But also companies are changing how they communicate. So, for example, there are now broadcasts out from CEOs telling their stakeholders what they're doing, how they're going to help fight the pandemic. We're also seeing videos from homes from CEOs, both connecting with their staff and, again, their wider communities, which, again, is transformational. We've had a number of clients saying, gosh, we never realized our CEOs would do their own communications and videos from home. But we're also seeing companies talk more about what they're doing on broader piece. So actually there's an example here from Temasek talking about how they are helping people communicate and fight the pandemic. There's also examples around, go to the next slide please, around, again, companies communicating how they're innovating and adapting during the COVID crisis. So there's an example here that, and we'll provide the presentation and the links for you later. And finally, I think there's an example as well. Next slide, Dan. Yeah, of the final one there was really about how some of the work they're doing in that sector to improve how they're communicating with their audiences again around the COVID impact. And so that's the only time in this presentation we're going to dwell on COVID, but the reason I brought that to life was I think it really is, as I said earlier in the presentation, acting as that kind of trigger and enabler and accelerator of change. But we're already seeing in the marketplace. And I think when we look ahead at innovations, what we're going to take you through is 3 buckets. First bucket is around innovating the experience. In other words, how users consume content. We'll then move on to talk about innovation in access. So in other words, how do people get hold of the content quicker, more on the move, and more if they're enabled to. And the third area is innovation in enabling technology. In other words, how we publish and manage and produce that content to deliver the other 2 things. So I'm going to hand on to Dan now to talk about the innovations in experience and bring some examples to life.
Thanks, Rich. So taking you through this, we've basically got some key examples that we wanted to kind of showcase to you. And the first one really is in terms of how people are kind of consuming that content. It's really about thinking about storytelling, thinking about engagement. How do we make sure that people are reading our content? There's obviously statistics that say people don't engage with long videos or long scrolling pages of text. But how do we fundamentally get key messages to key stakeholders and engage audiences? So what we're seeing is a lot of examples out there in the market of how businesses are retweaking the way that they promote content, restructuring it on the page, and thinking about the hierarchy. So it's not just a case of having the odd little kind of heading and a paragraph and a heading and a paragraph, but actually really changing the pace as you scroll through a page to really kind of have a dynamism to it in terms of how you can showcase it. And so I've got a couple of examples for you here. The first one is Adobe. It's a digital transformation piece that they put out. What I'm just going to do is show you how it works in terms of online, because obviously I don't want to be showing you in a PowerPoint. Far better to show you visually. But the idea here is that you're actually interested in what the content is. And what they use is very succinct tools to get you to keep scrolling. So you've got navigation on the left-hand side. It's broken down into 5 key areas. And fundamentally, you can then start kind of on your journey. So again, thinking about how that storytelling is being brought to life. So digital transformation, and what they're using is an analogy of running, and how running is quite a difficult sport. And there's, you can't just run a marathon, you've got to build up to it. And it's a little bit like that with a digital transformation project in terms of how, marketeers can be seen to be kind of trying different things within the marketplace. And this is all about how they've done a survey on those trends and priorities within the market. So here you can see that there's lots of little bits of text. There's interesting ways that you can navigate down the page, joining lines, different kind of parallax approach in terms of the text, and different heading styles. And nowhere are you seeing more than about 150 words in any one location. So actually it becomes not so much a big unwieldy integration of content. It's around engaging audiences with a different pace. So now I'm seeing statistics, I'm seeing interesting kind of graphics. I'm then seeing charts and graphs, so I can then start changing this in terms of how the company, has been kind of looking at the different statistics in terms of, the research they've done. So as I'm scrolling, this is all around the storytelling mentality of what we're seeing. And so as an innovative approach, it really showcases to us how a differential kind of style of web page actually means that it's far more engaging to audiences. And they also then break this up with the use of kind of a structure of navigation. So the main areas you see here allow me to navigate quickly and easily to those subsections. So if I was then going to be seeing a video as well, interactive with text, but if I was then to drop down into maybe the assess section, change of color, change of pace, understanding that I'm keen to scroll and find out more. And again, no unwieldy large amounts of text, but different ways of engaging, but using similar styles for the graphs, but fundamentally it all feels a little bit different. And actually, as I'm going down the page, it engages me to read more. The other example I just wanted to show you was the Apple example. And Apple are notorious for being very good in terms of showcasing to us kind of what makes them a little bit different. But here you've got a very long page. And how do they, again, get people to scroll and think about that story as you're kind of navigating through? So different ways of kind of transitioning, different styles of heading, and again, a different pace to the screen whereby they're reusing assets, but it doesn't feel like they've kind of reused the same components. It's really about understanding how they can tell a story around what makes this product unique, why it's beneficial to me as a user, and also then thinking about, well, what else could I be showcasing? So again, different styles. Here we're quite narrow in terms of the visual kind of techniques, showcasing sizes. But as I scroll down, I'm now going full width with my imagery. I'm now using a different style of text. And now I'm using a color bar to really kind of differentiate the pace of the page as I'm scrolling down. And all of this manifests itself in a way of, we feel, a really innovative way of bringing a story to life in terms of showcasing content. And what makes this example really nice is they also integrate technology. So what they're using is augmented reality. And fundamentally, they're not just saying, okay, well, this is great, you can use it with your new product, which is obviously a really nice thing. But as you scroll down the page and you keep going through, obviously showcasing all the benefits in terms of why you should be using this product. But then there's also the opportunity to kind of really showcase it in its own environment. So again, using AR and different tools. So here again, different widths of images. And again, the assets are all fairly the same, but they're using that in terms of breaking up the page and making sure that I've got an understanding of what it is. I want to keep scrolling. I want to find out more about this product. And as I keep going, you'll see that they've used the same components, but it really feels like a different kind of pace as you scroll right the way through. And the last thing I wanted to just get to was this augmented reality element, which again really showcases how, even as I'm going down the page, they've kept something quite light in terms of functionality till the very end. So if I'm using then my mobile phone, I can then actually use it to showcase what it would look like on my own desk. And again, that's quite a low level element to have so low down the page. But again, they're confident that they can get people to scroll and really kind of fundamentally showcase all of this different technology. The next kind of thing I wanted to take you on was kind of some other examples of innovative kind of approaches, and these take the form of gamification. And there are statistics that say that people engage more, they find more of a sense of belonging with kind of something that gives you a gamification approach. But again, from a corporate comms point of view, it's often difficult to imagine how you might manufacture something that increases dwell time, increases engagement, maybe drives social engagement, and really drives audiences back. So I just wanted to take you through a couple of very simplistic examples. This one is Mission 1.5. It's the UN Development Programme's initiative to basically educate people in terms of the policies that they have on global warming, understanding what the key climate issues and actions might be. And they're using a game form. The whole process of this is trying to keep the global temperature below the 1.5 degree threshold in terms of increasing. And it's asking me lots of questions along the way of, should I be using plastic wrapped products, or understanding what the pollution might be in terms of the decisions I make. And all of this data is then being captured, and they can analyze it and understand if audiences are kind of understanding how they're trying to tackle the problem of global warming. And it's a really nice, simple example of how gamification can be brought to life through key messaging. The next example is on Bayer, and this is a soil health quiz, obviously something that I'm sure a lot of people are fully familiar with. But why we thought it was quite nice is that it's a very simplistic way of engaging with audiences, and we're going to be engaging with you shortly because we'll do a poll towards the end of this to understand, the different kind of priorities. But again, just by simply asking relevant questions, you can then start to understand what the audiences are after. And this could be, whether this could be related to certain things about investors or careers or different kind of stakeholders, but understanding how you can get a little bit of value out of them as much as they can get value out of you by understanding what the content is. For those that are looking at the screen, the answer is 6.5 to 7, by the way, just if you are interested in your high quality arable soil pH levels. The next example I really love, and this is probably my favorite one of the whole presentation. So this is Zerb. Now, Zerb are an agency. They're an agency based over in California, but they've taken a rather novel approach to how do we get people to read our web pages? How do we get people to engage? If we're thinking about, maybe we're lucky if they get 2 pages, they spend maybe a minute or 2 on our site. Well, actually, we're gonna make a game that means you're gonna stay on the site. And how do they do that? And don't ask me why. This is just what they do. But they create a game where you've got to find a cow. And so as you're scrolling through the site, you'll see here that a cow appears. It doesn't appear as soon as you get on the site. It's not that easy. This is having me returned back to the homepage, having been around a little bit. And the idea is that you collect your cow, you unlock cows as you go, and then you can monitor where they are in terms of, your own cow palace. So again, a really nice interactive way of making sure that maybe people are reading, different sections on your website and engaging with different audiences. The final example is Burberry. So this is all around Ratberry and around the Chinese New Year. And they had a game. The idea was to drive audiences, understand obviously the importance of it in terms of the Chinese market. And it's a really simple platform game that allowed you to jump between levels. But again, was a really kind of nice example of how people are thinking about how to engage audiences and make sure that actually they're raising awareness of their brand through things like gamification. The final piece of this around kind of how people are consuming kind of content is around personalization. And again, thinking about how those online experiences can be more engaging if people understand exactly what I'm after, because what I'm after might be different to what you're after in terms of the content. And actually, it raises an interesting question of how we structure, especially corporate websites, whereby are we trying to facilitate too many things to too many audiences? Should we be actually just asking a question of what it is you're after, rather than having an investor section or a sustainability section or however we kind of feel that we should structure it? But fundamentally, it's about then getting the most out of you as an audience member, and again, understanding what you're after. So again, a nice and easy way is actually just asking, saying, what type of investor are you? What are you interested in? Are you an institutional investor? What is it that you're trying to look for today? And BlackRock do this quite interestingly in terms of just a very simple question and then surfacing different content depending on which answer you choose. Air France use a similar kind of notion whereby they're literally asking you whether you're a shareholder or a journalist. And then it's all about surfacing different content and different information as you go in terms of the audiences. So again, what is it that I'm interested in as a journalist might be different to you as a shareholder. And again, this is, I feel, a really nice way of personalizing the site. Now, corporate communications is often a little bit behind the curve when it comes to more consumer focus, but what we're seeing is that personalization is rife out there in terms of then whether it be by geolocation. So for example, if you've been doing your online shopping recently, it will be able to tell you exactly where you are, and it will surface obviously the relevant information to you. But what we're also seeing is that companies are using automatic preferences. So therefore, if you go on ASOS and you are selecting that you want to look at male clothing, the next time you go back, it already remembers your preference, and it'll give you and surface content and information that's relevant to you by saving your settings. And again, that's a really interesting angle in terms of understanding what the audiences want, but also not asking you to do that each time you visit the site. In then terms of thinking about what content you want to be reading, the BBC had a really interesting example here whereby they were almost asking you what you wanted to know in terms of whether you want the short version or the long version. How much time have you got to engage with this content? And this again is an example of where you could actually select a video if you wanted to go that way. But thinking about it from, do people have time to engage with the content? Are they really interested in 300, 400, 500 words, or do they just want 2 lines? And again, thinking about what the audience's needs as a really nice example of how, you can prioritize content for different audiences. This example is around Fossil, and again, this is a retail example, but thinking about how personality traits differentiate you as a user. So this is all around kind of understanding your social handles. So thinking about what you're posting, whether you're introvert or extrovert, and making decisions off the back of that. And what Fossil are doing is they're using that data to then surface different kind of content. So again, if you feel that you're more muted colors or you're more of an extrovert and it's all bright pinks, then they will surface different content to you depending on your preferences in terms of social media. And again, that kind of understanding of who you are actually helps them sell off the back of it. And that's why things like Adobe Target and Adobe Campaign are really kind of helping focus sales in terms of understanding the users and being able to then disseminate the right kind of content in the right way. That means that they can really target, behavioral targeting really in terms of you as a user. So that's a kind of a summary really in terms of the first piece of innovation. And then the next is really around...
And I think it's really interesting, isn't it, in that last example, how your social media profile can really determine the type of web experience you get when you visit the website. Almost spooky in terms of how accurate it can be. I just wanted to interject a little bit. If you have any questions on the sections or any of the ongoing sections, then feel free. There's an opportunity to click on a Q&A link at the bottom of your screens. You can click on that and ask a question. and we'll try and pick those up as we go through the presentation. So do feel free to do that and engage with us, no problem at all. Sorry to interrupt. Andy,
no, don't be silly. Thanks, Rich. Okay, so let's keep moving through. So this is around how accessing content is changing. And again, we've just got a couple of examples of maybe how users really are starting to use technology in terms of how they're, kind of getting to content. And the first is a chatbot. And chatbots have been around for a little while now, and it's understanding a few things about how a chatbot can be beneficial in terms of, especially from a consumer audience, but also then from a corporate audience in terms of what we're trying to say. So again, fundamentally, the technology is there. It's really easy to integrate. And actually, that a lot of this will help, customer inquiries in terms of being a high number. This is 90% of all customer inquiries will be driven by chatbots because they can deal with simple FAQs. They can deal with simple requests. And that's where the technology is changing, that are evolving, that actually they'll be able to deal with far more complex kind of elements in terms of AI and everything else kind of going forward. But where we've seen them being used is on things like BT. So BT have got a careers chatbot. This is B. She's there to help you in terms of your personal job assistant at BT. So you can ask her anything, literally on the page. It's plugged into the technology. And it's provided by a company called Paradox. And Paradox is literally an out-of-the-box solution. And it's so out of the box that actually the Paradox chatbot have used exactly the same picture. So this is Olivia, who is exactly the same person as B, but it almost doesn't matter. But what I guess this example I like is because it's basically a solution that allows us then to facilitate a useful component that means actually people will go, okay, I understand, I can ask a question and I can engage with the content. But almost this is kind of asking a too open question in many ways, because actually, what is it that I want to know? Do I know what I need to know in terms of the content? So we were looking at examples of whether you could actually start, by telling you a bit more about yourself. So, I'm an investor. I'm looking for careers opportunities, or maybe the right-hand side, it's literally just saying, are you looking for a job? So understanding who the audiences are and using chatbot technology could be a really nice way of saying, okay, we can personalize, we can almost kind of functionally allow you to then select the content that you want to be seeing, and we can surface that in a way that is engaging with you so you can understand exactly what you're looking for. And the other kind of faux chatbot we've seen, again, a BBC example, but this is where I'm not necessarily asking an open question. I'm asking a very direct question because I'm only allowed to select from a 3 or 4 options. And this is all around the Man City financial fair play issues that they had. But again, a really nice way of saying, okay, how do I find out more? And what we see this working really well is for things like results or the full year kind of promotion of kind of annual reports and different things, where you can ask specific questions around an investor audience and actually drive audiences to understand more about your business, how you've been performing, and fundamentally give them more information as they go through. So, a really nice example of how you can maybe kind of not give people full sway to ask whatever they want, but you can guide users through in terms of finding interesting content, and obviously then push them away in terms of then saying, here's a PDF you can review more detail, or here's a web page you can go to and find out more. The last example is voice search. And the thing that amazes me about voice search is that the stats are growing exponentially. I mean, it's 50% of all searches will be voice search. And it always amazes me that it's not a bigger thing here in the UK. And in the US, it's huge. It's just the normal thing. You ask your phone, that's what you do. The UK is still catching up. But I think what we're seeing is that people are starting to think about how and why people are accessing that data. So you've got the likes of Siri and Alexa, but what users are focusing on is speed, because they're essentially saying, look, I just want to find out something quickly. They're thinking about accuracy and also then the ability to understand. And I think fundamentally that means that are users starting to use this for corporate communication style queries and questions, or are they still saying, actually, I want a pizza. And that's why the first thing we were looking at is, when is it being used? And I think what we'll see is more people using it for more complex searches, and it will become the norm. I mean, dare I say that eventually kind of keyboards and things will go, but as your kind of voice recognition systems work harder, actually it becomes quicker to initiate in terms of, I just want to be looking for something very quickly. But fundamentally at the moment, they're probably using it more when they're driving, they're more using it when you're watching television or at home. But it's starting to be that actually people are using it for different things. And the dissemination between teenagers and adults in terms of what they're using it for, but the more complex of teenagers actually saying, I'm looking for directions, or I want help with my homework. There's some big kind of questions. It isn't just text so and so or play my favorite song, but actually it's starting to be a more complex approach in terms of asking some direct questions. So we thought we'd have a bit of a play with this. So we thought we'd have a look at Burberry. Now, we operate the Burberry corporate website. We do the Burberry annual report. So we thought they were the perfect kind of example of kind of showcasing to you guys kind of how voice search can be implemented, but also why it's important to make sure that you can update as much of the content as you can, make sure it's all up to date, make sure that other sources are up to date as well in terms of what people are looking for. So the first thing to do was set our question, and we thought we'd keep it nice and simple. So what was Burberry's profit last year? Okay, I just wanted to play to you, and this is the level of either my technology or a slight Gloucestershire twang from my youth, in terms of what was Burberry's profit last year was one of the examples that I came up with. What was Burberry's profile last year, and what was Burberry's population? But fundamentally, it got it right more times than not. And I'm only playfully just showcasing some of the examples that popped up occasionally when maybe I was saying it too quickly. So what we thought we'd do was showcase to you what Burberry's profit was last year, because we do their online annual report. And so we thought we'd pull out the adjusted profit 438. Okay, so that's the figure that we're looking for. So again, just showcasing what we did in terms of then the search results. We went out and asked Google, and we did it through a voice search. What was Burberry's profit last year? Now, it missed the nuance of the S, but we still asked the question, and this is what it came up with. Now, what you can see in this example is that we've just said it's 438 million. So actually, they've got it wrong. What they've done is they've referenced a CNBC report from 2017-18, which is showcasing last year's profit. And it might be a number of reasons. It might be the fact that it's an SEO issue in terms of obviously rankings. CNBC are always going to get more kind of clicks in terms of people clicking through. But it's also understanding how you can control your data, and understanding how Google understands what Burberry's core data is, because obviously it's looking at sites that it trusts. And obviously being CNBC, it's part of the corporation, it trusts it. Wikipedia, it trusts. It's looking for that when it comes to search results. Now, Burberry PLC was third in terms of visibility. It was slightly behind the fashion ranking. But what you can see is that the Fashion United ranking above got it spot on, £438 million. So again, we've seen a search result similar to Google when you're typing it, to be blunt with you. It doesn't get it right every time. And it's due to a number of different reasons when you're searching. And as you scroll down, so this is the third page now as I've kind of used my mobile, I've now got half-year results and full-year results, both from a blog posting. So again, there's lots of different information, and it's not as clear-cut or easy for search results of any description to then come back with the exact answer. You need to do a little bit of digging to get to the right place. So we thought we'd be fair and ask Siri as well. And again, our friends at CNBC came up in terms of being quite low on the list. But interestingly, they've got the full year results from Fashion United front and center, which is the correct number. So again, a slightly different nuance in terms of findability. So just to prove the point of how search can be a little bit of hit and miss in terms of this, I thought I'd then return to desktop. So, and again, because it didn't pick up the apostrophe S, I put the exact same term into Google. This is me now typing it. And funnily enough, I got the right answer, which is 438 million. And I just thought I'd show you the comparison with the search as well. Now, interestingly, I've just mentioned about the apostrophe S, because this is where Google really fell down, because I then put what was Burberry's profit last year, and it told me it was 2.73 billion, which is great news for the guys at Burberry. But what they've done is they've miscalculated, and this is the revenue number. So again, although it's slightly different search terms, it's the nuance of how search works, and understanding that voice search is something where you need to be controlling your data as much as you can. So understanding what I was just talking about earlier around trusted sites, when you're looking at Burberry operated income, this comes up. It gets it spot on, nice and easy. It's not a nuanced question like I've just asked, but it's understanding that this is the data, and what it's looking at here is it's taking it directly from Wikipedia. So again, thinking about how the content you're putting out there from what you control on your own corporate websites is also then linking up with maybe content that's elsewhere. And here you can see where I've highlighted the 4.37.2 million, which is the correct figure from the operating income. So that's a little bit of fun in terms of the voice search, but what we're definitely seeing is a marketplace where this is something that will become more and more important in terms of from an innovative point of view. And actually being able to control your content is a real challenge in terms of all the different kind of manifestations there are out there in terms of all the different kind of areas. But what we're seeing is that voice searches will continue to grow, and actually it will understand and I think drive the likes of Google to be more accurate in terms of the search terms and the results that they're putting back. So now, after all of that, in terms of kind of the questions and the gamification and everything else, we thought we'd ask you a little poll. Rich, do you want to do the honors in terms of showcasing this? So what we were keen to do was get an idea of exactly kind of how you saw the innovations that we've just run through, and which ones you think were going to be the most impactful. So what I'd like you to do now is just select from the list, whether it's storytelling, gamification, personalization, chatbots, voice search, or if you think it's something else. Fabulous, the results are starting to come in. Okay, fabulous, thank you guys. Just give everyone a few more seconds. Fabulous. Okay. We're sharing those poll results with you now. So you can see that storytelling and personalization were the top two. So storytelling being 52%. Interestingly, gamification, chatbots, and voice search slightly lower. But I think that was quite right in terms of how people are engaging, and they're engaging with the right kind of audiences in terms of that personalization piece. So really interesting to see that across the board. Let me just stop sharing these results. Rich, do you want to take us through the final chapter in terms of enabling technology? We just unmute as well, Rich.
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the first couple of sections of the presentation you've seen is, I guess, two of the three buckets that we talked about. So the innovation around the experience and how people are consuming content. Then secondly, how people are trying to get quicker and more accurate access to content. And now what we're going to just touch on very briefly is around the enablers through technology. And I think, as we look at the next slide, we can see that I think one of the key changes over the last 5 to 6 years has been the ability to have a much more integrated communications platform. And I use Adobe as an example here, of this obviously, but Adobe is the clear leader. And what these integrated platforms are enabling us to do is to really seamlessly integrate and connect our different platforms. So you can see that it looks across at what they call the marketing cloud, which is around the content management system called the Experience Manager, how you run campaigns and target content and personalization that Dan was talking about earlier, and of course integration of video. That all seamlessly interacts and works with the analytics cloud and managing your audiences, so you can see what audiences are accessing what content, again to improve your targeting and future behavioral analysis. And of course the day-to-day analytics on the website and how it's performing. And of course then for a more commercial organization requiring advertising, of course you can integrate those elements as well. So what this is really doing is changing how we're able to produce and generate content, because I think one of the challenges an organization has is what often referred to as content velocity. there is so much content and data that is being taken into market. It's how you can effectively manage and produce that content. And platforms like this enable you to do that. So then honing in a bit more onto the next area within that, just a couple of examples around powerful content management systems. What we're now seeing is the ability for CMS systems to be able to produce what are called content or experience fragments. So in other words, taking elements of content and being able to publish them across all different diverse channels, exactly the same content written once, published multiple times. And then of course, there's things like image recognition. So when you have an asset and you load it into your system, it recognizes the image, it adds the tags, labels, and so on accordingly, again, improving efficiency and usage in future scenarios. And of course, big win is around cross-channel content. So again, writing the content once and publishing it in your app or your intranet or your website or your commercial site and so on. So a really powerful way of making your production and delivery of content much more efficient, in order to frankly help us keep up to date with the different and plethora of channels that are out there in the market. And then moving on from that, if we look then at the machine learning and personalization examples. So, this I think is where that whole piece right back at the beginning I shared with you around the data comes into play. So that data gives us a real ability for powerful machine learning. So we're able to deliver really relevant and engaging and personalized experience by blending rules. And so it's really the integration of what I call machine learning and of course artificial intelligence. So that also allows automated campaign delivery, automated communications, across your different channels. And it draws on things, whether it's your behaviors in the site or behaviors of people that seem to have a similar profile to you. It's the location you're in, it's what device you're using, it's the on-the-fly analytics that people are looking at, what your search term is that's taking you to the site. And so really using the data and your content platform to be able to tailor and personalize that experience will absolutely be the way ahead for people producing communications market. And then I guess moving on from that, taking that to the next stage, there's facial recognition and biometrics. So, we know already familiar with Face ID, for doing payments or opening apps and so on in your phone. But actually it's now being tested to also assess the effectiveness of content. So actually, as a bit of an anecdote, a couple of years ago, they would do a screening of a film to an audience and then give them a survey afterwards. Whereas what they do now is they just do facial recognition of the audience. So they're automatically assessing throughout the whole film how you're reacting to the different scenes. And now that is being applied to both websites and other communications. So imagine when you're on your phone, it's able to do your frowns and smile recognition. It's able to do eye tracking to see where you're looking on the phone. It's looking at things like pulse rates, temperatures, and so on. And it can actually then assess how you're viewing the content and what you think of it. So if you're frowning and looking puzzled at where to go, clearly the navigation isn't working and so on. So when you think about how we're creating websites of the future, this is going to give an extraordinary power to companies to continue to improve and enhance their communications. So I guess that was just a fleeting view of some of the ways that technology can help us deliver content more effectively and fulfill, frankly, some of the experience and access content that Dan was talking about earlier. And needless to say, I think digital innovation continues at a helter-skelter pace. And as I said right at the beginning, we see it into three key strands. There's innovation in the experience and how we consume content. And I thought it was really interesting how you rated that as highest in terms of the immediate priority. And frankly, I think that's entirely right. I think the access innovation is really enabling people to get to content quickly and effectively, and probably more around being on the move and needing content urgently as going from point to point. But clearly, we also need innovation in our tools and technology so that we can keep up with the pace of change and the required content velocity that I referred to earlier. Our view is also that COVID-19 will actually accelerate the pace of change and transform how we communicate. And I think, frankly, the commercial performance between digital leaders and digital laggards will continue to widen. And I think, frankly, as more communications, more services, more technologies come to the fore, if you're not leading the market or at least being well up to speed with it, then you will fall behind your peers and competitors. And clearly, we are here to help you focus your innovation and also to enhance how you reach, engage, and influence your stakeholders through those digital technologies. Now, I don't know if there are any questions that people want to ask. I know we've covered an awful lot of ground in a short period of time, but we wanted to keep it pacey to give you a broad breadth of innovations that we've seen in the marketplace. So please do feel free to click the Q&A buttons if you have any questions for us. Give you a couple of minutes to think of any questions. Okay, I can't see any questions as yet. Okay, cool. All right, well, what we will do after the event is we will share with you the presentation and some of the key pointers from it. Do feel free to reach out to us, if you've got any further questions or any follow-up, or just share some thinking, or come to us to see how we can help you innovate your digital communications. We're very happy to hear from you. I can see one little question come up. Were Black Sun involved in any of the examples you presented? Brilliant. In terms of creating the corporate site for Burberry, yes, as Dan mentioned in that. Frankly, in this presentation, what we wanted to do was to draw in examples from across the globe. So no, we weren't directly, but we just wanted to share different experiences with you. So I hope that answers your question there. We are. Sam, is there anything you want to say?
I was going to say there's another one there from Mark. So he's asking, with more people working from home and kind of using their PC screens more and more, will websites have to be even more exciting to engage users? And I think it's a level of excitement, but there's also kind of a level of thinking about how you engage with audiences. And I think hopefully we've shown you today that there's a number of ways of doing that in terms of content, structure, thinking about anything that could be more engaging, like gamification. But yeah, I definitely think that there's going to be more kind of requirement to really kind of engage with audiences to make sure that you're kind of getting your messages across, as people are maybe becoming more and more kind of digitally savvy about what they're looking for and where they're looking for content.
I think that's true. There's quite an I was reading something the other day that talked about I think it was the difference between tech lush and tech lash. Tech lash being the backlash against technology and how it's driving, things like allegedly personalized ads on Facebook and so on and so forth. But actually, if you look under the trends, what you're seeing is quite a lot of tech lush. In other words, astonishingly, people are now spending 6.5 hours a day on screens. So, Mark, I think your question is spot on. I think you will need to create a website that stands out and is more exciting to the users you want to engage with. Definitely agree with you entirely. Okay, no further questions. Thanks, Daniela, for the comment there.
No, it's all good. Some nice comments coming through thanking us, though, so all nice.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming along to the session today. As I say, we'll share the outputs with you afterwards. And as I say, do feel free to come back. And if you want to share examples with us that you've seen, feel free. We're always very happy to learn and see what good practice looks like across the piece. As and when we implement some of the elements that we've seen today, we will definitely share those further with you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, guys.